Good evening, Dave. Everything's running smoothly.
Welcome to T-Bone's Best of Roanoke show. Music, comedy, and conversation featuring HB, the Honey Badger.
Honey Badger don't care.
Now, on with the show.
T-Bone's Best of Roanoke show comes to you today from the Raleigh Court Library. We're here with the voice from the void, Steve Stanley. And he is on Radio Free Roanoke, Face the Fantastic Show. And with me, as always, is my co-host, HB. HB, good morning.
Good morning, T-Bone.
Have you ever heard of this Face the Fantastic Show on Radio Free Roanoke?
Yes, I have.
What'd you think?
I was very intrigued. I thought it was very interesting, and it's a good show.
It is a good show. I've listened to it many times. And Steve, we want to highlight your show today. We also want to get your take on science fiction and fantasy and horror movies. And finally, I want to hit some hot button coast to coast issues like UFOs, JFK, and ancient aliens. But we'll get into all that in a little bit. But let's talk about your show, Face the Fantastic. Tell us about it.
It's a little show about things that are weird, odd, strange, peculiar, bizarre, or otherwise interesting to me primarily, and I hope to the audience also. Well, as of last year, we had 5 different comic book conventions. We had 2 each of the Roanoke Valley Comic Con and the Big Lick Comic Con.
Well, let's stop there for a second. Now, at a comic book convention, what would people expect to take place? What kind of things go on there? What are the main elements of a comic book convention?
Well, of course, at the minimum, you would have a lot of comic book dealers in, sometimes literally tons and hundreds of thousands of comics for sale. Anything from comics back in the 1930s on up to things of today. The dealers will be selling them, plus frequently toys and t-shirts and other things that are adjuncts to the comic book culture, I guess you'd say. There are a lot of independent authors who show up, independent artists. You'll find people there that you do not see on the stands. Frequently there are panels or promotional items by various artists and companies there. Often there are signings by prominent people in Marvel or Dark Horse or DC or companies like that that are on the stands.
So if I was looking for a 1960s era Fantastic Four magazine or comic with Dr. Doom, there's a chance I might find one there.
Oh, almost certainly, yes.
And where do these take place?
Everywhere today. You'll find them in small towns, you'll find them in big cities. Of course, people hear about Comic-Con out on the West Coast where there are hundreds of thousands of people that attend it. Same thing in New York and in other major cities.
Well, like here in Roanoke, would they take place like at a library or at Berglund Theater? Where would I find the Comic-Con type events in the Roanoke Valley?
Depending on who's holding them, they have taken place at local hotels, they have been at libraries. Currently, the 2 big series are taking place at the Berglund Center and at Tanglewood Mall in one of the vacant stores there.
So that's big stuff.
It's a big business, yes. There are people who do that for a living. They promote comic book shows.
Now, how would I find out that a Comic-Con is coming to Roanoke?
Put in Comic Book Convention plus Roanoke, Virginia on a search engine. You'll find it.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
All right. So comic book conventions are popular here in Roanoke. What else would be a convention that might occur here?
Well, for instance, last year we had 2 that you'd say were Harry Potter related. One was the generic Magic Festival, since they were asked not to use Harry Potter in association with that from the previous year.
Yes, I remember that.
The other one was Muggle Fest 2 was held last year down at 16 West Marketplace.
Now, what was that all about?
That again was a Harry Potter related convention. They had a Happy Birthday Harry cake. They had magic performers there, some of the local people who perform magic. Invited people to come in costume. They had some programs for kids, things that they could participate in that had to do with Harry Potter and related things. Of course, a number of dealers there selling merchandise.
Okay, so it's a big Harry Potter theme. That's very popular. Have you read the Harry Potter books or watched any of the
Yes,
movies?
I read all those.
You read them all?
Yes.
You're a fan?
I liked them, particularly the early ones. It got very dark as you went on, of course.
Have you watched all the movies?
Yes.
Oh my word. Okay. Okay. I don't think I've watched any of them yet, Steve. Would you recommend then I watch them?
Oh, definitely.
Should I read the books
They're good
first?
movies. Reading the books first may spoil movies for you because movies can never capture all that's in a book.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's true.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay.
But the movies are good on their own.
They stand on their own. Okay. And then is there a Mysticon, like a general science fiction type of convention here?
Yes, Mysticon's a general science fiction, fantasy, horror, pop culture convention that's been held in Roanoke from 2011 on up to the current day. This was Mysticon 10 that just took place last month.
All right, so that covers just about everything.
Like
It
Freddy
covers-
Krueger and all the.
Yeah, there's lots of horror there. That comes largely with the independent filmmakers who come in. Some of them premiere films there. Some of them are showing films that have been shown at other festivals. They give talks on how they make the films and how they cast them, and sometimes special effects or other things that have to do with making the movies. We get in a lot of science fiction and fantasy authors. For instance, George R.R. Martin, popular for one of the TV series a few years ago, was a guest at Mysticon year before last. Of course, he'd been booked 3 years in advance, so
Wow.
his TV series had not come out at the time he was booked. But
What was the
he's a good
TV
author.
series? You remember?
I'm blanking on it. I remember the books were the Fire and Ice series that he did, and I didn't see any of the TV programs.
But they show movies or clips of movies. They have authors come in or actors or.
Oh yes, authors, actors, producers, special effects people, just about anybody. For instance, this last convention that was there, Robert Picardo was the media guest of honor. He's probably best known as the holographic doctor from the Star Trek Voyager series, but he's also turned up in things like Stargate Atlantis and the current series, The Orville, which is another science fiction fantasy series on TV.
Yeah.
So when a guy like that shows up, do they just show up in costume or just regular street clothes?
Typically, they're going to be coming in street clothes. They are actors, after all, and most of them don't really have that much interest in the genre as a whole, but they can tell some great stories.
It's a business. They just do it. It's a business.
For a lot of them, yes.
Yeah.
There are some that do get into it, yes, but
So Mysticon covers everything. It's been going on for 10 years or so. Is it over 1 day or 2 days or 3 days? How long
it's a
does it
full
last?
weekend. It starts usually about 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon and ends about 3 or 4 on Sunday afternoon.
You know, what's the biggest Comic-Con thing in United States? Where would it be? And
It would be Comic-Con San Diego, probably.
okay.
But like I say, there are others that will break the 100,000 mark easily in New York, in Chicago, in St. Louis, and several other cities.
Wow.
And
It's become more popular. Would you say in the last 5-10 years compared to? I mean, I don't know how long these Comic-Cons have been going on, but it looks like it's more popular today than ever.
It's growing in popularity, yes, definitely. Well, the first one I went to was 1975 down in Atlanta, and it only drew a couple of thousand people for that one.
Steve, that was a long time ago.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
Do you collect comic books?
I used to, up to the time I got out of the Army, but then the prices had just gotten to the point where I couldn't afford it anymore, so I've got about 15,000 sitting in the basement.
Now you mentioned you did a Bigfoot either a convention or some type of
Conference, yes.
Conference. What was your take on that when that was over and you went and witnessed?
There were some people who were very seriously interested in Bigfoot as a cryptid, an unknown creature that has not been officially discovered yet. There were some people who were looking at it more as an entertainment property, and there were some people who were just crazy and believe it.
What's yours? So you don't fall
What
into
category
that,
are you in?
category? Yeah. But okay.
I observed the people and the process as it goes on, but no, there were people there who were going, you hear that branch break out? That's a Bigfoot breaking the branch right now.
They're coming our way.
Yeah, that's one of those shows you never see what they're looking for, but the intrigue of
Yeah, things like mountain monsters are great fun to watch at times.
Yeah.
What are these guys going to come up with next? We have a trap to catch something that doesn't exist.
Right.
Well, then on your show, you not only interview people from conventions and things like that, you have odd stories. Where do you get your stories? They have quite a twist to them.
Well, there are a lot of stories out there that are available for use without paying royalties because they are not in copyright. They are not held by an estate, at least at present. So you have access to them for nonprofit purposes, or if you want to make a profit, you can make deals with the people who have recordings of them.
Okay. Well, you have quite a few, and they're always good. And your music selection is always very eclectic and good. I like that. What do your music? Do you have certain favorites, or is there just a lot of that type of music out there?
Well, there's quite a bit of the music that you would think of as specialty music or novelty music out there. There have been for years. Of course, the Dr. Demento show is a classic source of tunes like that. Nowadays, there's a group called the Fump on the internet that performs music of that type. A lot of it is related to science fiction, fantasy, and horror. A lot of it isn't. So I get things like In My Driverless Car, a song that recently came out, very topical, not really fantasy, but still something of interest to the people. Or songs related to computer use or other facets of modern culture that you're not going to hear on the radio typically.
HB and I, on the way over here, we were talking about in 70s and 80s maybe, the local stations on the weekend would have like a horror night or a scare night, and they'd have a local host. Do you ever remember any of those shows, or did you ever watch those?
Yes, I did. I remember back in the 60s, for instance, out of Lynchburg, there was a thing called Movie X. On the other hand, here in Roanoke, we had a thing called Family Theater that was hosted by a local TV personality, Lee Garrett, where they would show things like Queen from Outer Space or Kaltiki the Immortal Monster or old films from the 40s, 50s. Then in I think it would have been up in the 80s, there was a show on what was then Channel 27, not affiliated with the current holder of that channel designation now in the area, where they ran a Saturday night horror show hosted by the Count and the Invisible Man. He needs to begin.
The Count and the Invisible Man.
Yes, both of them, of course, had very southwestern Virginia accents.
But,
so it wasn't quite what you think of as the normal
Man.
horror creatures.
I'm intrigued by the Invisible Man. Did he ever show himself?
Just the bandages.
Yeah.
HB, what were some of he was telling us about some of the shows he used to watch, but what was that one you would watch?
There was one that I grew up in the Richmond, Virginia area, and they had a show back in I think it was the early 70s. It was called the Bowman Body Show, and he would show horror flicks, and when the show came on, it would be a casket in the middle of a room, and he would open the lid and sit up and say good evening, and he really wasn't a character that was serious. He was more funny, and I know he came to our elementary school, and we took him as being a big celebrity, and there was a lot of people showed up, and he was big in the Richmond area for a long time. So I know I always enjoyed his show. It came on late, and Mom and Dad would let us, me and my brother would sit up and watch it, and we laughed as much as we were intrigued of the show itself. But
yeah, they had a lot of schlocky movies on shows like that. Dr. Mad Blood out of the Tidewater area.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
Someone made a movie a few years ago where they were interviewing a lot of the Virginia horror hosts, and I think it was about an hour and a half feature-length film. And the Bowman Body, of course, was one of those.
Oh, okay.
Nobody that I know of so far has been able to catch up with the Count and the Invisible Man from Roanoke. Nobody knows who they were that I've talked to. People are searching for them. There's an internet site called the Horror Host Underground that you can go to and find a lot of the old people. I mean, pre-Elvira, back to the days of Vampira.
Yes, yeah.
So the Count and the Invisible Man were back in the 60s here in Roanoke?
No, that was the 80s, if I recall.
The 80s?
Yeah.
And they still, it'd be hard to track down that Invisible Man.
So back sometime before the Fox affiliate took over Channel 27.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about movies too while we're here. I want to get your take on science fiction movies. What are good science fiction movies that you like or that you'd recommend? Fantasy movies. What would constitute a fantasy movie? Horror movies. Are we talking slasher movies? Or what's a horror type movie? So with science fiction movies, Steve, what ones jump to your mind that you would recommend or that you've enjoyed watching? Science fiction.
Well, my very favorite movie of all time is a science fiction movie. As a matter of fact, it's playing right now on TCM.
Oh, Turner Classic Movies.
Yep. Forbidden Planet.
Oh, that's an old one.
Well, 1954. Yeah. Old but a goodie. You figure it had the top stars of a film studio at the time, MGM. They had the best special effects company in the business in the world at the time, Disney Studios. They took the plot from a Shakespearean play, The Tempest, and they had the world's first full-length electronic musical score done by Louis and B.B. Barron for that.
So this was not some drive-by, put-together a movie effort. It was.
This was a major studio production, and it was done right for once. Very few were.
And it's science fiction. Just a quick overview of what the plot is.
It's a predecessor of Star Trek. The space cruiser C-57D comes to the planet Altair 4 to rescue the survivors of a colony that was planted there, but which did not thrive. They find there's only one of the colonists surviving, but he also has a daughter. And he has built a home for himself, rather comfortably for someone who was shipwrecked, with the aid of a robotic assistant. That was the introduction of Robbie the Robot to science fiction fandom there in Forbidden Planet.
Yes. Did he eventually go in something like Lost in Space? Or?
Robbie appeared on Lost in Space. He appeared on UFO. He appeared in The Invisible Boy. He appeared in lots of movies over the years. He appeared on an episode of Columbo, for one thing.
Wow. Okay, Forbidden Planet. Okay.
Yes.
What about in the 50s, did Gene Barry's movie War of the Worlds, did that come out then? You remember that one?
I remember the movie well. I can't remember the year right offhand, but yeah, it was quite a good movie. One regret I have is that they didn't do the Martian war machines right. That's the only version of it I've ever seen in comics, in books, in TV, or on the screen that did not have walking machines. Instead, those floating machines.
Ah. That's right, they were. But they made a great sound when they shot that laser, didn't
The
they?
heat ray, yes.
The heat ray. All right, let's see. Planet of the Apes, Charlton Heston. How would you rate that?
It had a good ending. It had great makeup, which should have won more awards than it did. It had some great acting in it. But it was limited by the story itself. The best thing, of course, was the twist ending, which was written into the story from the Pierre Boulet novel.
Mm-hmm. So it was written in, it wasn't in the novel?
As I recall, it wasn't quite that way in the novel.
Oh, okay.
It didn't have the people discovering the Statue of Liberty at the end.
Right.
Going, oh, we're on Earth.
Yeah.
It was a little more subtle than that.
Yeah. And then one of my favorite, I guess this would qualify, tell me if this would qualify as science fiction, Alien, the original Alien.
Oh, yes, science fiction and a great horror story.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was so good about that was your anticipation that something bad was going to happen. You didn't really see the gory details of what happened, but it was just the build-up that something's going to happen.
Yeah, they did a lot of mood building in that movie, which was a very good thing. It's always better to imagine the monster than to have it shoved in your face, because whatever they can do in Hollywood is never going to be as realistic and as scary as your imagination can make it.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Okay. All right, so science fiction there. What about the fantasy movies that you've enjoyed over the years? What are your top fantasy movies?
Oh gosh, things like the Sinbad films, or of course some of the Hercules films.
Oh wow, you're going way back there.
Yeah.
Well, they keep making those, you know.
They do?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. For instance, Lou Ferrigno famously made a really bad Hercules film. They've made several of them since then. Some of them have great special effects, but they're schlocky movies. But the Sinbad films, I was privileged to be able to interview Caroline Munro, one of the first ladies of fantasy film, a few years ago when she was in Roanoke for another convention. Starred in one of the Sinbad films as the princess who was taken by the evil sorcerer and had to be rescued by Sinbad and his men while they encountered all the dangers of fantasy in that era. You know, the living statues with swords in all four arms fighting fighting a battle with him, things like that.
Oh my! Was there one male lead actor that was Sinbad, or did they switch around?
There were several over the years, depending on whether you're talking the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. There were about 5 or 6 films that I can recall.
Do you remember Jason and the Argonauts?
Oh, that was one of my old favorites, yes.
Where the skeletons they came out of the ground to fight.
Yeah.
The Children of the Dragon's Teeth.
Yeah,
yes.
that was it. That was good.
Now, back when I was a kid, my mom and dad took me and my brother to see it was, if I get it right, 2001 Space Odyssey.
The best science fiction film ever done for accuracy, yes. Which is kind of a sad thing to say, considering that was 50 years ago.
Yeah, wow.
69, right?
68, actually.
68?
A little over 50 years now, but
Yeah.
yeah, they went for a high degree of accuracy in that film, and they achieved it, and nobody since has gone to the trouble to recreate that. The one thing that struck me most in watching the movie, you just catch a brief flash of one of the characters opening the door to a zero-G toilet, and you see there's directions posted there. They actually wrote out these directions, although the camera never showed all of them. They had it for how to use a zero-G toilet. That kind of detail.
That's zero gravity toilet.
Yes, yes. Which is not as easy as it might sound.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the number one all time then.
As far as accuracy for science fiction films, yeah. I mean,
My-
that beats
my
out things
father-
like Gravity, which is much more recent.
Yeah, that's 2001 Space Odyssey. My father loved it, and I was very young,
Right.
and it just confused me. I remember us riding home, and it was quiet in the car. Was at night, and I said, Dad, what was that about? And because it was just, I think you had to be a certain age before you would understand a lot of it. But I've always been intrigued with the movie since then. I've seen it 3 or 4 more times and read up on it some.
Well, just talking about these movies today makes me want to go back and revisit some of them, especially Forbidden Planet. But before we get off this topic, what about horror films? What are some of your top horror films? And would this include those slasher films, Steve?
I don't really care for the slasher films in that respect. The best one of those would have to be the original Halloween, because it built a lot of mood, even though it did have a lot of gore in it too.
Yes.
And they had a remake of Halloween this last year, right? Some
Another
anniversary
remake.
division?
Another one. Yes.
Yes.
It's been,
Yes.
and they're always it's like Jaws. The very first one was just,
It knocked your socks off.
yes.
Jaws was one of the great monster movies of all time.
Yes. I think so,
Bruce the
too.
Shark was an incredible monster.
Yeah, and well, the first Jurassic Park to me was another movie that
Oh, the opening that grabbed you.
it's just
So
fantastic.
you saw that crate rattling around and
Yeah.
grab somebody from inside.
Right
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, good stuff.
now. Oh, go ahead. I was going to say Svengoolie is a show that has a lot of. Me and my wife watch that every week. But I know you want to get to the horror, T-Bone.
Well, Spengula, just tell us a little bit about that, though. Is that a show?
Yes, and Steve, you maybe could comment on that more than me. I know it's out of Illinois, I think.
Yeah, it's out of the Chicago market area. It's part of the MeTV Saturday night science fiction lineup, along with other shows like Star Trek and Lost in Space and so forth, where you have a host introing a movie and periodically interrupting the movie to do his own shtick, where he'll pretend to insert himself in the scene or make a phone call to one of the characters who happens to be on the phone in the movie, or he plays little songs from time to time about things that are going on in the movie, has guests on the show live sometimes to comment on things, like Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, who was noted for one of the big novelty songs of the 1950s.
Oh.
So he does a lot of interesting things, and of course on a national scale, whereas most horror hosts only had a regional reach with their stations previously.
Okay.
Okay, and then one of the last things I want to wrap up on, Steve-O, is I tell HB a lot of times I'll wake up 2:30 at night and I'm awake, so I'll listen to the radio, and it's Coast to Coast, WFIR radio. Have you ever heard of that radio show?
Yeah, I started listening to Coast back in the 90s, back when Art Bell was originally doing it.
Yeah.
And I frankly thought the program was better than he stuck more to topics that were of interest to me anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of times now they'll get off into medical discussions and just different types of massage or different social issues that aren't as interesting as ancient history or the space program or alien visitations or remote viewing or time travel.
That's exactly what I want to get your take on as we wrap up here. UFOs. Give us your take on UFOs. Are there UFOs out there?
Of course, that just means unidentified flying object, and there's lots of those out there. Now, the question of whether they happen to come from other planets or other dimensions or something like that, nobody can tell. My question would be, why would they keep watching us unless they're just getting a laugh out of it? George Bernard Shaw famously said, the longer I live, the more I see, the more I'm convinced that other planets use the Earth as an insane asylum. Maybe they're just keepers that are
the
watching
Blue
the door.
Book, the show, I've been watching the series Blue Book, and it chronicles the UFO sightings and different things that went on. I guess it was right after World War II, if I remember right. But area.
Yeah, I've heard of that. And then another big coast to coast topics, JFK. Who killed JFK? Was it the Cubans, the CIA? Was it Lee Harvey Oswald? Was it the Mafia? What's your take, sir?
My vote would be that LBJ was involved in it somewhere.
There you go.
He was the ultimate conspirator, I guess you'd say. He was a wheeler and dealer in Washington for years before he became vice president. The go-to guy in the Senate who could get things done for a price. And the price was always something that would advance him personally or politically.
LBJ.
Yes.
Yep.
And meeting the man did nothing to dispel that, I'll tell you.
Oh, you met him?
Just briefly, my parents went with me on a vacation down to his ranch in Texas. And we're crossing over the low water bridge and seeing the ranch house out ahead. And yeah, he happened to be there. I think Lady Bird was elsewhere at the time, but
Wow.
So yeah, LBJ. I've always heard that he had the means and the motive, and
I think if he didn't actually have it done, he probably knew about it in some fashion.
yeah, okay. And ancient aliens, was Earth populated by ancient aliens? Where'd those darn pyramids come from?
People built them. No, seriously, there was a Japanese group back in the 80s that decided to see how hard it would be to build a pyramid using ancient methods. So they actually built a small one. It was only something like 80 feet tall, but it was a tremendous amount of work, but it can be done. If you get about 10 to 20,000 people working on this in the off-season when they're not growing crops and harvesting them, you can do amazing things. People continually underestimate our ancestors. They were just as smart, just as capable, just as imaginative as we are. The only thing they didn't have were some of the techniques and technologies that we use today. But they could build anything they set a mind to. They could build anything that we can today. In fact, they did things that we can't do today.
Right.
Okay, case closed. I've always wondered where they came from. All right, my last three things, Steve. Just a simple, tell me who you like and why. I'm going to give you three. King Kong versus Godzilla.
I favored Godzilla in that one. I have to.
Is it the fire coming out of his mouth?
Well, he was the king of the monsters. You had to go with that. Yeah, he was. If you look back at the original movies, of course, Godzilla was like 600 feet tall, as opposed to Kong, who was supposed to be more like 40-some feet.
Right.
But so they had to size up Kong and size down Godzilla to match him up and make a good match there.
All right. Batman versus Superman.
Oh, I was a Superman fan all the way.
All the way.
Batman was a buddy for him, and he was the great detective, but he was not the superhero that Superman was. And I don't like the idea that they've changed that nowadays, retconning it to having Batman always suspicious and always ready to take Superman out if he steps out of line.
All right, and final one, the big one, Star Wars versus Star Trek. Which side are you on?
Well, I'm a fan of both, but I'm not that big a fan of either one. I watched all the original Star Trek. I haven't watched a lot of the subsequent series that they came out with. I watched, of course, the original set of 3 Star Wars movies back in the days when Lucas started saying, no, there were only going to be 6. That's all I ever intended. And, of course, changed his mind again. Because I remember meeting George Lucas the year before Star Wars came out when he was hyping his film at the Kansas City World Science Fiction Convention. He would say, yeah, there's going to be a series of 9 films.
He was hyping Star Wars at that time?
Yeah.
Oh,
And I
my.
thought, oh, there's no way a studio is going to put that kind of money in it to make it that kind of success. It's going to be the biggest blockbuster of all time.
Right.
Well, I was wrong, thankfully, but yeah, he had the Darth Vader costume, one of the droids in a display case, and some of the other things from the movie, and was showing some little trailers of special effects and so forth.
Wow. Wow. The year before it came out.
Yeah, 76.
76. Wow. Okay. So, okay. You could go either way then on that. Well, I'll give you the last word. I want you to tell us, when your show's on Radio Free Roanoke, where people can find it, and we'll close it out then, my friend.
We are on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. with a repeat of the show Sundays at noon. Radio Free Roanoke is 95.7 FM on your radio dial.
All right. Enjoyed it, Steve.
You're the man, Steve. Great voice, great
Thank you.
information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The mission has been completed.